to sort of mixed media stuff that you can do in Photopea. So if you generally do things by hand and you like to work with a lot of drawings or textures or patterns that you've made by hand, or you like to do a lot of collage, but you're finding actually that you've not got access to a printer or a scanner or a photocopier, then some of those things that you normally do sort of in college or that you like to do by hand might feel a little bit trickier now that you're sort of at home. So Photopea can help to sort of bridge the gap between those two things. So I've just started an A3 document and I'm going to press create, and you can see it's giving me a white background. You can have a white background or a transparent background, it doesn't really matter. So you might collect a few things first, so you might have some of your own photographs. So I'm just going to drag in some photographs here. So you might have some photographs that you've taken. And I can see it's put these under my background, so I'm just going to move my background down to the bottom. You might have some sort of patterns and textures that you've found. So you might be looking for some things like fabrics or interesting natural textures. You might be looking at actual photographs of sort of objects. So for example, we've got buildings and all that kind of jazz. And then you might have some stuff that you've sort of done to bulk that out. So some mark making or something like a sketch or a drawing. I'm going to drop some things in here. Okay, the first thing I want to go over really quickly is what to do if you've got a photograph of a drawing. So here's a fine liner drawing of some architecture. Now you can see, compared to the white on my background here, that it's not the same colour. So if I start to work with that, it's going to feel a little bit disjointed and it's not going to look quite as nice. Obviously, depending on the lighting, we are in the middle of the winter, the sunlight's not great, so taking photographs of your own work, especially when you've not got access to a scanner, can mean that you get this sort of like grey effect on your drawings and things. So really nice, easy fix is I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments and Levels. Now this gives me sort of 3 little markers here under this graph. This one is for my darks, so I can bring my darks darker, and then it means I can bring my lights lighter. So you can see that white background now blends in perfectly with the white of my actual document. You can play around with sort of the mid-tones if you've got loads of shading. Obviously this is a fine liner thing. If it was a pencil drawing, you'd need to be careful of sort of that shading and losing those middle grey colours. You can bring that back that way a bit, or you can bring it down to make it a bit more subtle. Once you've got something you're happy with, just click OK. So that's sort of step 1. Now, you can see when I move it, it reverts back, but as soon as I click the tick, it goes to that. If you're totally happy with that and you want it locked, so you can see my smart filters are here and you can sort of change those and things. If you're perfectly happy, you can just go up to layer and rasterize, and then it sort of locks that and flattens it. You could do, so this is obviously a black fine liner drawing. If I wanted this to be a bit more interesting, I could go to hue saturation, and then I could colorize this and I could get it into different colors. So if I take my saturation up and I take my lightness up, then you can see I can have that in any sort of color I want. So you could think about, if you've only got access to black felt tips or pencil or black pen at home, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do really cool designs that use loads of color just because you've not got access to that at home. You can scan them in, you could do different drawings in different layers and then start to layer them up over the top of each other in different colors, and that'd be quite interesting. I'm just going to change that back to black for now. One thing I could do is put this on a coloured background. So I could go to my rectangle tool and I could draw a shape in the background, and then I put my drawing over the top. You can rename your layers, so you could just put drawing and then it just helps you sort of identify things a bit quicker. Now obviously I've got a white background on here, which means it's not going to go on to my red background straight away. Obviously I could use my magic wand tool, but you'll notice that obviously because I've drawn this, there's all these tiny little bits of white that you're really going to struggle to get to with the magic wand tool. So you can see it's going to struggle. And even if I rasterize that, it's going to sort of not look so great. So that's not ideal. So if I just undo that, really nice and simple. So Command D to get rid of your squiggly lines. Just set it to multiply. So you can go to your layer modes here, and you can put it on the multiply blend setting, and then you can see it applies perfectly onto that red background and looks as if it's sort of meant to be there, and that's really the kind of thing you want to go for. So nice and simple, putting a colour black background behind it. You could do a series of shapes behind your drawing or behind anything that you've made, so it doesn't just have to be a plain background. You could then go and do some interesting sort of collage stuff with different shapes and do some cool things behind it. And because I've got that drawing on top, so that drawing is the very top layer, anything that goes behind it will look as though it's on the background, so it's been put behind. So really nice and simple and nice, quite and easy things. You'll notice when I click something, it automatically selects it. Now that might not be working on your screen. Really easy, it just says auto select up here. So if I want it to select whatever I click, so if I just tick that, and you can see it selects that because I've clicked it. That's because it's on auto select. If I don't want it to, because that's causing trouble, so sometimes, you know, I want to select that, but it will select the drawing over the top of it. If I untick auto select and go to that layer, then it will only select the layer that I've got selected. So it depends on what you're working with and how you want it to work, but you can use that auto select function to sort of help you out there. Another thing you could do is put photographs behind drawings. So you can see I've got some patterns and textures here. So I could then start to place these in the background and see how that looks. So the same thing again, just pop it behind my drawing. And again, obviously I've got my auto select on, so I could just go back to that layer. I could change the colour of this, I could change the, I could make it black and white, I could change it to, go to hue saturation, so I could take the saturation down, which will make it black and white, or I could put the saturation up, colorise it, and then change it to a totally different colour, and I could take the lightness down, or up, and sort of fade it out. So you can get loads of really interesting effects. I can also play around with my blend modes here and sort of see what it does when I apply it over the top of what's there already. You'll notice that sort of darken and multiply sort of make it go into the background on top as a darker layer. If you go to lighten or screen, that will sort of brighten up the layer behind it. You've also got these options down here, which can be quite interesting. Overlay's a little bit more subtle, so it depends on how bright your image is. And then we've got things like difference, which sort of like gives you vibrant colours, exclusion, subtract, divide. So you can sort of see sometimes it will work in different ways. It really depends on the images you've got, the colours you've got going on, what order they're in, etc. Now, if I just wanted this to go in a certain part of my image, then I can start to use my selection tools. So if I decide, well, actually, I only want that photograph to be inside, let's say, this part here, then I could draw around that with my selection tools. I'm just using the polygonal lasso here because I found that one the easiest, and then I can find my image, copy and paste, and hide it. So you can start to do sort of interesting collages where you cut parts out according to the image that you've got. So if I take another image, for example, so let's say this, I get auto select back on, let's say I've got this sort of like gravelly texture that I want here, and I want to put that in this next bit. Again, put it behind the drawing so I can use that as sort of a map, and then I'm going to use my polygonal lasso, draw around the bit that I want it to go inside of, and then I'm just going to go to the layer that I want, which is this one. Again, if you name your layers, it will make it a lot easier. And then I'm going to do copy and paste, hide the original one, and there you go. So now that is inside of that shape. Again, I could apply my blend modes so that I get it sort of looking like it fits, and I can try different options and things. So I quite like that. And you can see we're starting to get something quite interesting. It depends on what your image is as to what you want to do. Obviously, this is nice and simple. You could start to work with sort of like filling specific shapes. I've got some mark making here. I quite like using mark making, and especially if you look at sort of collage artists on Instagram and things, they quite often tend to use a mixture of flat shapes. So we've got our flat background and our flat circle. Then they might use a mixture of sort of patterns or textures, which is what we've got going on here with the photographs that we've used. You could also use more sort of layering and things like that, but they quite often use sort of handmade textures or mark making, or something that has more of a sort of organic feel. You can see here, if I bring this one up to the top, I've got these sort of textures that are sort of like fabrics or hessians and things like that. So sometimes having like a paper style background or a texture from concrete or something like that can be quite interesting to then put drawings over the top and then collage onto those, or you can cut sections out of these. and have like abstract shapes using those textures. But here I've got some mark making. So this is sort of like pattern and texture made with ink, made with fine liners, made with paint, made with coffee. It depends what you've got at home. You can use coffee. And then obviously you can change it to black and white when you get on here. So it doesn't matter if it's coffee coloured and you don't want it coffee coloured. So I've got my patterns and textures here. And I actually quite like this sort of section at the top. So I'm going to get really zoomed in. And using my polygonal lasso, I'm just going to draw around, not too carefully, but sort of so I get the bits that I want. The section that I think I want to use. So I'm going to draw around this sort of general area. So I think I want some of this as well. Now you can always go back in with your eraser later if there's sort of sections that you think, oh, actually I didn't really need that, or I don't want that bit. You can go in with the eraser tool. Obviously, because I copy and paste these things out, I've always got my original to go back to. So if I copy and paste it out and I think, oh, actually, I want to choose a different part of the image now because I don't like how that looks, or I just want to try something different, because I've done a copy and paste, I've always got my original to go back to. So it doesn't really matter if you get the wrong bit first time. So I'm going to copy and paste, hide my original layer. Now you can see I've got this sort of chunk of texture and pattern that I can start to use. Now, at the moment, obviously it's got a white background on, so that doesn't look very good. So nice and easy, just go to multiply, and that gets rid of the background for us, and it puts it over the top. Obviously, because this is black, it's not really fitting in. It sort of overlaps a little bit too much. So really what I'd be thinking then is, okay, well, do I try the screen? But then obviously that's going to pick up the white background. So I don't really want to do that. So if I go back to multiply, I could go to image adjustments and then do hue saturation. So I could colorize it, I could turn the lightness up. And turn the saturation up, and then I could play around with my different colours. But obviously because we've got this applied, we're getting sort of strange effects. So if I just reset that and click OK, if I take it off multiply and put it back on normal, this is where I might actually have to take the background out. So I might have to try my magic wand tool and just get rid of the majority. So now if I go to image adjustments, hue saturation, tick colorize, turn my saturation up, maybe make it a little bit lighter, then I can start to get some interesting effects. I might want to go for like the blues, or I might want to go sort of dark blue, bring the saturation up a bit, take the lightness down. I could go all the way to the top, and then I get this white colour, so I could go you know, bright white on top. But I'm going to sort of go for this mid blue, and then I'm going to just play around with where I want that. So I might want to flip it round, put it down here. And now obviously because we've got something that's got colour in it, that will then change what happens when we press multiply. So it's really just about thinking, you know, what can I try, what can I have a go at? Doesn't matter if it doesn't work first time, or if you don't quite like the first option that you get. Really is just trial and error and just seeing what it does. Sometimes things will look very different to what you expect. You can't really predict how it's going to work out each time. So it's really just that process of playing around and seeing what it does. See, that to me looks quite nice. I quite like that. So you can start to integrate some patterns and textures in there. Now you can do this with anything. So if I just sort of group all of these things together, I'm going to put all of those into a group. So I'm going to go to layer, group layers. And I'm just going to hide that a minute. Now you could take sort of a drawing that you've done. It might be of a person, it might be of an object, totally up to you. And then you could start to put shapes and colours behind them in the same way. So already this image has got the background sort of nice and clear. So again, to get it nice and clear and looking like that, you can just go to image adjustments and levels. So if you've drawn it by hand and it's on paper, you kind of need to do that to get it looking nice and clean and crisp. Really simple things you can start with, putting shapes and objects behind the person, behind the picture that you've got. You know, think about your colour schemes. I use colour scheme websites all the time just to really think about, well, you know, what colour do I want that to be? What's going to work for me? I can double click here and then I can change the colour manually. Or I could, if I eyedrop a colour that I've got already, I can sort of pop it in. So I might just go for this blue, which is quite nice. I might just tone that down a little bit. And then again, if I put that behind my image, let's just find which layer is my top layer, so it's that one, so let's put that one at the top. And then set my image to multiply. Again, we get that nice effect where the shape goes behind the image. You could then start to think about texture again. So I've got some fabrics and things here. And I could cut out some patterns and textures from this. Now, if you're getting layers being really awkward, so because that one's on top, it keeps catching when I try to click someone else, just use that little padlock icon and it just locks it for you. And then whenever I click something else, it goes, oh, do you want this one instead? And it's nice and simple. So I could then bring this forward and I'm going to figure out whereabouts I want to put it. And I'm going to look at that sort of section on the sleeve. I'm going to get zoomed in. Now you could change the opacity of your background layer here to make it a bit easier to see. So you can see now that's a lot easier for me to sort of figure out what I'm doing. I might angle this as well. I'm just going to rotate it slightly so it goes in line with sort of the direction of the sleeve. And then what I'm going to do is just sort of roughly go around that area. And obviously where it's curved, I'm just doing sort of like shorter clicks, and then I'm going to copy and paste and then hide that one, and you can see that's now sort of gone inside of my image. And I could start to build them up like that, so I could then look at other textures and things, other images that you've got that you could use. Depends what you're trying to capture, but really whatever works for you. It might be bits of magazines or bits of fabrics that you've got around your house, or photographs that you've taken, anything really that you think links. It might be, you know, stuff that you've made already that you've then photographed. Obviously, if we were at college, we'd be scanning these sort of things in, but it's totally fine to work from photographs while you guys are at home. And then you can start to build these layers up. So I'd then maybe do some blue texture. I might do that on the collar. And I can do exactly the same thing. And you can start to build up these layers of sort of collage together stuff. If you think about sort of like cutting and sticking, if you were doing this physically with things that you've actually sort of gathered, so bits of photocopying or bits of stuff you cut out from magazines, it's exactly the same process. So the lasso tool is almost like your scissors, and then using your layers and putting it behind the image is almost the same process of sort of like sticking it down and drawing over the top of it, except that you've done your drawing first and then you're starting to play around with other bits and bobs. So there's a few examples of sort of how to do things like that. Obviously you don't have to work with a drawing, you could just work with photographs. So again, I'm just going to put all of these in a group so that I can hide those easily. Put that one in, just unlock it first. There we go. You can see here I've got just a photograph of a building. Now I could, again, sort of delete the background out, either using the magic wand, or I'm just going to use my selection tool here because it's a very angular building, so it's quite nice and easy to go around with the polygon or lasso tool. I'm not worried too much about cutting any little fiddly bits off. You know, I'm not going to cry over that. And then, again, same process, copy and paste it out. And hide the original. And then you could start to build that up. So you could start to do layered collages with multiple photographs or multiple drawings or multiple textures. So then I could have a look at something else like that I could then throw in. Now this has just got a white background, so I could technically just set that to multiply, so it'll just go straight over the top. But then you can see obviously they do technically multiply directly over the top of each other. Now that might be the kind of thing you want to go for if you're looking for some sort of double exposure effect. You could colorize these, so you've got two sort of separate coloured versions going over the top of each other. And that would be quite interesting. So if I just quickly colorize that front one. Then you can see that looks quite interesting, and then we could always put a shape in the background. So you can see we've got something quite cool there. I might set my other layer to multiply so that it feels like it's sort of applied over the top of the yellow. You could cut different parts of these out, so you could use your polygonal lasso or your rectangle select to sort of cut areas of these out, or you could take areas and just move them. So you can see I can now take that separate piece. Now I've done copy and paste there. If you do Command X or Control X, and if I just rasterize that, I could do my selection tool and just shift it, so I'm physically sort of shifting it around, or I could do Command X and that will cut, and then Command V will paste as it would normally. So instead of sort of copying it and creating two copies, you sort of take it out and set that to multiply, so we can start to play around with different compositions, sort of cutting things up, slicing things. So there's loads of options, and it works really similar to how you would by hand. Once you get your head around the sort of lasso tools, it's very much like if you were doing a collage, you know, with things on paper and sort of playing around with stuff on paper. You could just play around with one image and some shapes. So I could just work with this image. If I hide that one and hide the little bit that we chopped out of it, you could just play around with one image and how it looks on the background. So I could just experiment with, okay, what does that look like if I set it to lighten? What does that look like if I set it to overlay? What does that look like if I set it to exclusion? So then we've got bright blue and bright yellow, and that's quite interesting. What does it look like if I then add some thin rectangles in the background in different colours? How does that influence the image and the composition and how it looks? So you can see we start to get something that's quite interesting. I could then do some different shapes and start to layer those over the top. You could put text over there, you could put text behind it. We could then go back to our patterns and textures as well. You could take some little drawings that you've done or little squiggles. So again, I've got some more sort of mark making here, which is a bit more geometric. So I could go back to my polygonal lasso, get zoomed in, figure out what bits I want to use. So I think I want to use this cool bit over here. Now obviously this is not drawn on just a flat plain piece of paper. So when I copy and paste that out and hide the background, we've got all of this going on. So this is another case where you need to go to adjustments and your levels. And I'm just going to try and get this to a point where I'm happy with it. She's looking a bit better. Yeah, and then we've pretty much got rid of everything. So if I actually just do a magic wand now, you can see it pretty much gets rid of all of that. So if I delete that out, then I should be able to just go in and delete those bits out. So always think about sort of like cleaning up your image first. It will make your life a lot easier. I could then just go in with my eraser tool, make that a little bit bigger, Command D. And then I can just go in and get rid of any last little bits that need mopping up. And then I've got my cool sort of texture here. And I'm just going to zoom out. I'm going to lock that. Again, you can take off auto select so that it will just naturally move that layer for you. So I could sort of line that up over the top of the building. Looks quite cool. Obviously that's sort of multiplied over the top because I put it rather than being directly up top. I could then play around with just making it look like it fits, or doing the opposite and doing sort of lighten or screen so that it sort of goes brighter on top. Again, you just need to play around and see what works and what doesn't. Some things will look quite cool, some things will look a bit rubbish. That's totally fine. I could just go back to normal, and then I could change the colour of that again. So my image, adjustments, hue saturation, tick colorize, and again I can make it bright white if I wanted to, which looks quite nice. So loads of different ways to do stuff multimedia, so you can make your patterns and textures at home. You know, mark making doesn't have to be done with ink or specialist paint. It can be done using coffee or nail varnish or rubbish paint from Asda, like whatever you've got. And if you've only got one colour, that's absolutely fine, because then once you get into a software like this, you can do absolutely anything you want with it. The options are all there. So playing around really. Let me just group those together and then I can sort of show you what we've looked at. So if I hide that one, first one we did was this one. So playing around with sort of just an image and then filling the gaps in. Same sort of thing using a figure and filling in areas of the figure. It could be a face. You could sort of make the skin out of different things. It could be a flower, and you could fill each petal with a different photograph or a different pattern or a different texture or a different colour. And then the last one we did was sort of more image edit stuff with extra bits layered on top. But yeah, get playing around, photograph stuff. You know, it doesn't matter if you've not got a scanner, because you can always just change the brightness and the contrast using that levels option up there. So things you've photographed, things you've found, you know, anything really, and just start to layer it and play around with it and have a bit of fun, really.